Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, if there's one thing that's certain in Formula One, it's that the technical cycle, it just never stops spinning. It feels like we only just wrapped up the last season.
Yeah.
But here we are already tearing up the form book and bracing for, well, what promises to be a really seismic shift in 2026.
The turnaround is absolutely dizzying. We've been completely immersed in the source material predictions, really detailed technical analyses, and even some internal gossip about the driver dynamics heading into this new era.
Right.
When the rule book changes this much, it's just a massive engineering lottery.
Exactly. And the mission for this deep dive is simple. We need to unpack these, revolutionary technological changes to the power unit and the aero. And then we need to dive deep into the intense psychological and political pressure that these new rules are putting on the biggest drivers and teams in the sport. The stakes are just enormous.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right in the engine room, because this is, I think, the single biggest fundamental shift. F1 is pushing harder for road relevance, which means we're moving towards a near 50-50 split in power.
50-50. Between the combustion engine and the electric battery.
Yes, a near 50-50 split.
That is a staggering reliance on electrification. And it's complicated, I imagine, by the fact that they are just ditching the smartest piece of engineering from the whole hybrid era.
They are. The MGUH, the motor generator unit heat, is gone.
Right.
To remind you, that unit recovered waste heat from the turbo to charge the battery almost passively. It was efficient, yes, but it was incredibly complex, astronomically expensive, and really had no road car relevance, so it was binned.
So the turbo's still there, but now charging this much larger, much more critical battery. That's the core challenge. If the MGUH is gone, how are they planning to recharge that system mid-race?
Well, now they have to rely almost entirely on kinetic energy recovery, the MGUK. And what's fascinating here is the battery isn't just for a small boost anymore. It's fundamental to supporting the ICE's power band through the entire lap. The system needs constant management. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this forces a complete rethink of car architecture and weight distribution. That massive battery pack needs rigorous cooling and structural support.
Okay, so if the battery is now this critical, filling gaps in the ICE performance, does that fundamentally change race strategy? Is it almost like a qualifying push every single lap?
Absolutely. The biggest hurdle they found in early simulations is rapid battery depletion during a race. It's a strategic crisis.
Right.
If a driver gets the energy deployment mapping wrong, they could just run out of electric power halfway down a straight. This means drivers have to adopt new techniques, changing lift and coast points, energy management through corners. It's a completely new philosophy.
And speaking of new philosophies, the aero is also getting radical. We are moving from the simple DRS, that rear wing flap, to full active aerodynamics.
Yes. The new rules mandate a system where both the front and rear wings drop together to reduce downforce for maximum speed. This is a novel concept for F1 drivers and engineers. They'll have to learn exactly where to run low downforce settings, what they're calling the X mode, and where they need max downforce, the Z mode, to prevent instability.
But the source material also pointed out a huge side benefit to this adjustable aero, which I think improves racing quality overall. That's the flexibility in extreme weather.
That's a crucial safety and performance boost. Previously, teams had a static, preset race setup. If a sudden downpour happened, they were dangerously stuck with low downforce. Now, the ability to instantly adjust wings for maximum downforce in the wet will make racing better and safer. This is going to be a huge test for every team's core philosophy. Every constructor is going to be absolutely mad trying to make these cars work during testing in January and February.
This technical chaos, it demands absolute confidence and political control, which leads us directly to Lando Norris. Carrying the #1 plate, he has to manage a new kind of internal pressure at McLaren. We're sort of assuming here he's the reigning world champion coming into this new era.
And that cachet is invaluable. Lando, having secured the title, he gets a degree of comfort and gravitas that, relaxes him slightly. He carries instant weight in every engineering meeting.
So when he says this part doesn't work, they really listen.
They listen with far greater intensity than before he was champion, yes.
But comfort can be the enemy of progress, right? Especially with a teammate like Oscar Piastri. The source notes that Oscar was brilliant, but there were these little holes in his performance. Maybe some inconsistency on tire management or late race calls.
And you just know Oscar Piastri is spending the entire winter poring over data, figuring out exactly how to patch up those holes. He will come back with a massive, burning determination to stop Lando beating him again.
That dynamic will be brutal.
Oh, it will. Lando has matured, though. He's learned from mistakes like that Canadian incident where he crashed trying to pass his teammate. He stopped doing those things.
But maturity in this context means asserting control, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A champion has to try harder to mold the team around his needs. It becomes political work.
It absolutely is. You know, if a world champion comes to a new team, they immediately think he must know something of value. But for McLaren, there's a real dilemma. They have always prioritized keeping everything even, the famous papaya rules, supporting both drivers equally. But if they're in a tight championship fight against a team like Red Bull, which is totally focused on one driver, can they really succeed without throwing all their resources behind an undisputed number one?
That is the core problem. And this connects back to driver input. From your experience, the driver's input is so powerful, especially when the strategy computers aren't telling the whole story.
Absolutely. I remember a race in Barcelona, this was pre-hybrid, where it was the only driver who insisted on starting on the soft tires. The team wanted mediums. It was a risk, but it paid off immediately. Drivers have more power than they think, especially when chaos is reigning, which it will be in 2026. Lando needs to instill that clear, authoritative leadership, that we can do this, but we need to run my setup this weekend attitude. That's where a champion's power truly lies.
Okay, now let's shift to the absolute opposite end of that pressure spectrum and talk about Isaac Hadjar, stepping into what has to be the most demanding seat on the grid at Red Bull.
Yeah.
Hadjar had an impressive F2 season. He showed incredible consistency in qualifying, always knocking on the door of the top 8, and scored reliable points. He's clearly earned this based on raw talent.
He has the speed, but the psychological hurdle is immense. Max Verstappen has clearly defined the role for his teammate. You need to be a number 2 who scores points and keeps rivals off the podium, not a challenger.
That's a massive leap for Hadjar. It's not just a technical promotion. It's like 3 levels more psychological pressure.
It is. Can a driver who is world champion material, who believes deep down he can win, actually accept the role of number 2? Isn't being consistently 6th or 8th mentally just, well, incompatible with accepting that you're subservient?
Historically, it's where talented careers have just stalled out.
Exactly. I recall being Michael Schumacher's teammate early on. I did an article saying I wanted to be world champion that year, and Michael immediately responded in the press, basically clarifying the hierarchy for everyone. And he was right. You have to understand your environment.
So the famous parallel is Eddie Irvine's success with Schumacher at Ferrari.
Precisely. Irvine walked into Ferrari having already accepted he was the number 2. That acceptance made his working environment with Michael so much easier, no internal battles. It allowed him to focus on strong, consistent performances for when Michael had trouble. If Hadjar is going to succeed at Red Bull, he has to view this as a supporting role, a time to learn from Max's unbelievable pace and aim to be number 1 at some point, somewhere else.
And crucially, the political landscape there might offer him a slight cushion now. We should note the famously intense Helmut Marko is no longer there. Figures like Laurent Mekies are seen as potentially more understanding. If Hadjar can lower his personal expectations to just support Max, he might survive. Because if you walk in expecting to beat Max and you can't, that failure is just absolutely crushing.
It's a career killer.
Transitioning now to the veterans, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, the elder statesmen of the grid. Lewis has rolled since the 2021 regulations. It has been incredibly bumpy, hasn't it?
Bumpy is certainly an understatement. This year will be 5 years since that defining moment in Abu Dhabi, and he really appears to have never recovered his effortless speed or consistency since then. We've seen awful weekends, constant penalties, just a palpable frustration. He's taking a beating.
What's the root cause? Is it age, or is it a fundamental driving style mismatch with these Venturi cars?
That's the great debate, isn't it? I think the theory that these stiff ground effect cars just don't suit his driving style holds a lot of weight. Lewis has historically preferred a car that's a bit softer at the rear, allowing him to rotate it mid-corner. These current cars demand a very stiff planted rear end, which demands a totally different input style.
That mirrors the struggle we saw with Sebastian Vettel after the blown floors were banned. He was never the same driver after that.
Yeah.
So is Lewis dealing with a fundamental mismatch, or is the magic just fading?
Well, when you look at the psychological toll, the source material suggests Lewis is now working hard where it used to be effortless. He's consciously pushing, and maybe his mind is already moving away from that total ruthless dedication. From my own experience, the willingness to risk everything, that desire to push the car right to the very edge, accepting the risk of a monumental crash, that fades.
You start thinking too much. You're consciously operating things instead of just putting the helmet on and doing it. And you mentioned qualifying performance is often the first thing that declines.
Precisely. You lose those tenth of a second reflexes you need for that one perfect qualifying lap. And you contrast that with Fernando Alonso, who still throws in these incredible hungry performances. Alonso is fighting to recover something, a missed part of his career, and he is massively excited by these new regulations, especially if Adrian Newey delivers a genuinely loophole-ridden machine at Aston Martin.
Yeah, the shared hope is that if Hamilton gets a car capable of fighting for pole and victory in his final year with Mercedes, that fire would just instantly reignite.
We have to hope so. And we must remember, these 2026 regulations are massive, 150 pages of technical rules, which means the hunt for loopholes is already well underway. It's a regulatory chess game.
And the sources detail exactly how that engineering knowledge moves. People change teams, effectively leaking critical information, often unintentionally, despite NDAs. They call it cross-fertilization of ideas.
But really, it's a spy game played in P-shops and always. We saw a brilliant example of this kind of thinking with the engine compression ratio controversy. Teams were exploiting the fact that engine components, like the conrod, expand when they get hot. By designing it to expand by just the right amount, they could momentarily push the compression ratio higher than regulated for a performance advantage. That's the level of microscopic exploitation we're talking about.
And the FIA holds the God's eye view, monitoring everything. They see the dyno testing data, the wind tunnel data, and the fuel chemistry, which has to be 100% sustainable this year, by the way. They know who is asking very specific, probing questions about potential loopholes.
Crucially, we have to talk about Red Bull's resilience versus their new technical challenge. Despite losing key figures like Newey and Wheatley, they're still cohesive. Max's involvement in decisions has been powerful. But the source material highlights the massive challenge they face with their new in-house power unit with Ford, which is handling the electrical side. Building a competitive, reliable electrical unit from scratch is a huge undertaking against giants like Mercedes and Ferrari.
So who is set to struggle initially with all this technical chaos?
I think Alpine is in a real big rut. They have fundamental package-wide issues that just changing engine supplier won't solve. And, while it's unfair to write them off, Cadillac, as a completely new entry, faces an exponentially tougher learning curve. They will inevitably be fighting for the back rows at the start.
Okay, before we close, let's nail down some predictions. You said this is a lottery. Given the radical changes, what do you expect the grid separation to look like at the beginning?
I think the gap between the front and the back of the grid will initially stretch out dramatically.
Yeah.
The complexity of balancing that 50-50 power unit means one team will almost certainly find a fundamental flaw or advantage. I reckon we'll see a gap of 3 to 4 seconds, maybe more. It'll be compressed later, but initially it's going to be brutal.
I agree with that chaos factor. My prediction is, based on the strong, established team package Mercedes has, the clear talent of Antonelli, and the consistency of George Russell, I'm going to go with Mercedes for the Constructors' Championship.
Okay.
And for the Drivers' Championship.
I like your prediction.
Picking George Russell. He performed brilliantly, consistently in a non-dominant car last year, minimizing mistakes. If Mercedes nails this new concept, he's in the best position.
That's a bold prediction, but justified by their engineering pedigree. My dark horse prediction has to be Aston Martin. Given the resources, the time they've had, and the expected output from Adrian Newey, they have all the right ingredients to leap right into the mix.
So what does this all mean?
The 2026 regulations introduce immense, unprecedented technical risk, which at the same time creates massive opportunity. Any team that finds that one critical loophole or successfully manages that 50-50 power split can leapfrog the traditional frontrunners. That technical risk, coupled with the immense driver drama Lando versus Oscar, Hadjar's crushing psychological pressure, and the veterans Lewis and Fernando fighting for their final high stick, it just makes the next few seasons absolutely fascinating.
We established that Lewis Hamilton has struggled to adapt to the current stiff Venturi car generation. If the 2026 rule set is fundamentally different, will that total technical chaos be the environment required to unleash the best of the 7-time champion, allowing him to drive around the engineering problem one more time? Or will it simply create new, unsolvable problems? That's what we'll be waiting to find out.
That's something substantial for you to mull over as we head into testing season, and this has been an in-depth exploration of the sources provided. We'll be back soon with more deep dives.